The International Monetary Fund was established after the deregulation of capital markets during the Nixon administration. Immediately after the United States withdrew from the gold standard and opened capital markets to worldwide corporations, it was also found that using the International Monetary Fund, a newly created organization, as the lender for last resort for many developing and underdeveloped countries, was actually stood to the benefit of many American corporations. The International Monetary Fund philosophy is merely this: those governments that are subjected to needing vast amounts of money from the fund are required to follow its strictures. Often, which have been followed, are prescriptions regarded as neoliberal. These ideas are essentially perversions of post-Enlightenment capitalist theory, popularized particularly during the 1980s under the American President Ronald Reagan and the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. These concepts are very simple. These countries that receive billions of dollars from the International Monetary Fund must first open their capital markets. They must also have very tight budget restrictions. That is, they spend less and less money on social spending programs for the benefit of driving an export-led economy. The intention of this, of course, is to open their markets for foreign investment, number one, as a means of providing further capital for their purportedly sagging economies. To drive exports as a means of generating capital such that they can pay back their debt to the International Monetary Fund pool, and at the same time liberalize, or that is make more free, the labor market, such that foreign investment that comes in finds cheap natural resources. An example of this includes the IMF bailout of Mozambique, particularly in the late 1970s, when the Mozambican economy had collapsed after years of civil war with the withdrawal of the Portuguese colonial forces. Mozambique has borrowed a very small sum, $3 billion, from the International Monetary Fund. But Mozambique is poor in natural resources and is not a highly industrialized society. It has nevertheless used what funds it does have for the benefit of the International Monetary Fund. A fully 25% of all of its exports are given to the International Monetary Fund in debt service. These amounts of money are incredibly small. So small, in fact, that Mozambique cannot hope to pay off its debt, its mere $3 billion debt to the International Monetary Fund, for another 200 years. In the process, the 25% of money that they are giving from their exports is not going to education and healthcare, which is probably the worst in all of sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception of the central states of Burundi and Rwanda. What's more, the tentacles of the International Monetary Fund have begun to stretch into other parts of the world, particularly Latin America, as it has been used as the lender of last resort for a crumbling Mexican peso, and also in East Asia, particularly in the cases of Indonesia and South Korea, wherein large amounts of International Monetary Fund money have gone in hand with policy suggestions that have caused a further contraction of economies already suffering from a credit crisis. What has happened to these economies instead has watched their economies contract as labor prices have collapsed. The currencies have also collapsed, making their goods so cheap, in fact, cheap for the benefit of the countries that sponsor the International Monetary Fund, but so cheap that they cannot generate the income that is actually necessary to put the economy back on its own independent feet. These sorts of practices, advocated widely mainly by the Western participants in the International Monetary Fund, have actually caused massive crises and a cycle of dependence on the part of third world nations, particularly in underdeveloped portions of the world, particularly in Central America, South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, and have now begun to actually migrate into more developed societies, including South Korea, and even eventually into portions of Eastern Europe, including Poland and Russia. These implications have actually shown that these countries have not benefited from the IMF practice. They have not benefited from the one-time loan, and instead have watched a gradual loss of sovereignty. Therefore, one can see that the International Monetary Fund, founded for the benefit of corporations and the benefit of their participants, has actually done great damage to the